Okay, so now we're going to start with, we're going to skip those chapters. We're going to go to chapter 11 in the book because the chapters 6 through 10 are not dealing so much with music theory. They're dealing with melodic composition. They're more for a composition class. And they inject those things into music theory books because they try to cover everything for one class. But really, it's kind of out of place. I mean, you've got all these chapters on we talked about the passing tones and escape tones and neighboring tones. But then we go right into good 5-1. All this stuff is not music theory. This is composition. So they inserted that in this book because the books, textbook manufacturers want to include everything, so they sell more books. That's basically how it works. So these are not really a part of music theory. These are part of beginning composition ideas. So we're skipping that. We're skipping chapter 6. Yeah, these are all melodic ideas, melodic organization. Now, chapter 7. This is this is more of a historical look at music. The texture, monophonic, polyphonic, homophonic. Those are having to do with historical periods. So this is really not music theory either. But they include everything in here because manufacturers of textbooks just want to get everything in. They're trying to just sell more books actually, and they include all these topics. Another thing that happens is the books. I have been to so many undergraduate classes where the instructor assigns a book for the class and the book costs $150, and then you buy it, and then there's another book that costs $150. So you buy two books for the class with a cash outlay of $300, and then one of the books doesn't get used. Have you guys experienced that? Doesn't that really make you mad? You know, you just spent $150 on a book for no reason. You didn't, and I don't know why they do that. I mean, I don't understand. Some of these instructors just think that all you guys are just made out of pure money, and it doesn't matter. You just go buy whatever they tell you to buy, and nobody has a problem with that. I think everybody has a problem with spending $300. I only met a couple people in the past 10 years who could really not worry about it, you know. But in any case, all the materials I put on this for this class and subsequent classes, Harmony 2, 3, and 4, I'm always putting them up there for free because we like free, right? Okay, here's more composition. Species counterpoint, cantus firmus, that's a music history subject. Counterpoint, these are composition concepts. So, Incantus Firmus is a concept from the Middle Ages taken in through chant music. So, again, these chapters are inserted. And see, they throw this in here in the middle of it, these modes. So the organization is not what I would choose on this. So that's why we're skipping ahead. You know, writing counterpoint, first, second, and third species counterpoint would be the subject of a beginning composition class, not a harmony. The word harmony, isn't that in the title of the class? Harmony 1? Or is it Music Theory 1?
Music Theory 1.
Does it say Harmony 1 somewhere in there too? I know the other classes do. No?
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure that this class is just music theory 1, but I have heard of like music harmony and stuff like that.
Okay. So we're going to jump ahead here. A lot of exercises in second species counterpoint. That's composition. That's not harmonic theory. And here we get to more composition concepts. So now we're going to jump ahead. Okay, this is a good chapter, I think. It's talking a little bit about chord progressions. Okay, I want to jump ahead a little bit here. They're trying to cover everything in their book so they can say they covered it, and they write out this blues progression like this. I mean, technically it's accurate, but blues progressions are not written out 12 bars in a row. They're written out 4 bars at a time. Three staves of 4 bars each is how it's written. Okay, so we're going to go to a lot of material. All right, so everybody go to chapter 11 here. So we've been talking about 7th chords, and we jumped off the bridge and landed in the domain of 9th chords. So the idea is you guys understand we have this progression of intervals that make up the chords, right? For triads, we have 1, 3, 5, right? And for 7th chords, we have 1, 3, 5, 7. And for 9th chords, we have 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, right? So there's a triad. 7th and 9th. So that's a 5-part chord, right? So after the 9th, we have a chord that's 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. And what's the next one after 9?
11.
11. So that's called an 11th chord. And then we have, after the 11th chord, we have 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. And then what's after that?
13.
13, right? So this whole book, it stays within these two concepts. And that's as far as it goes. Whereas modern music uses all of these concepts. Jazz music uses these all the time, right? And uses ninth chords. Sevenths and ninths are used a lot in blues. And triads are used in pop music, classical music, pop music, but not so much in blues and jazz. They abandon the triads for the seventh chords. The triads are too what's the word I want to use? Homogenized for blues. Blues has more spice to it, and jazz has even more spice than that, right? So jazz has real spicy chords in it, which gives it its sound, and those are accomplished by using 11ths and 13ths. But classical music for 400 years, from 1400 to 1800, didn't venture beyond the triad too much. And the seventh chord was like Christopher Columbus falling off the edge of the earth, was adding the seventh. So they treat it as a huge subject, the seventh chord, because of 400 years of classical music. Sevenths were just something that was like taboo almost. So you see this huge chapter on seventh chords, a whole chapter, the dominant seventh chord. What's the dominant seventh chord, guys? What's the formula?
It's a
One,
major
three,
chord with a
five,
minor
seven.
7.
Go ahead, Kalani.
Is it just a major seventh? 1, 3, 5, 7.
No, the word is dominant.
It's a major chord with a minor 7.
So what's the formula?
1, 3, 5, flat 7.
That's the big secret there. Dominant means flat 7. And another thing is dominant always relates to the 5 chord in a key, the 5th scale root. Major scale, harmonic minor scale, and ascending melodic minor scales. Well, okay. So it's a 5. It's a 5/7 in all those scales. So that's the dominant 7 is a major triad with a flat 7 or a minor 7, right? So keep going. Dominant 7th chord is a diatonic 7th chord built on the 5th scale degree. All 7th chords have a particular sound or quality determined by two characteristics: the type of triad, major, minor, diminished, or augmented, and we still have sus4 as well. Major, minor, diminished, augmented, and the type of interval from the root to the 7th. So what that means is we got a root here. Oops. We got a 3rd, a 5th, and a 7th, right? So you got 1, 3, 5, 7. So this distance can be a major 7 or a minor 7th interval. And we also can insert an interval here. We got a major 6 and in more modern music we have an interval of a minor 6. So those are the mods, the 4 mods of a 7th, right? Now diminished here, a double flat 7 in a diminished equals a 6, right? So when they say a diminished 7, they're referring to a double flat 7, right? You there? And then that is also the same note as a 6, isn't it? So really it's the same note, and you hear the same note. Okay.
Real quick. If a diminished 7 is just a diminished chord with a flat 6 or regular 6, my bad. Why don't they just call it a diminished 6?
Well, you're saying diminished 6 would be taking a 6 and double flatting the 6, which would be a 5.
Hmm.
A diminished 7, they're thinking the logic of 7, 7, flat 7, double flat 7. That's how they approach it in the classical period. But that note turns out to be a 6, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
There's another bunch of academics in classical music that they have a term called the augmented sixth chords. And that's a 1 and a sharped 6. What the hell is that? Isn't that the same as a flat 7? Anybody with me on that?
It is.
Okay, so those terms exist because they are trying to show a progression of proper voice leading. So the 6th going up in a chord, here's a 6, and then the 3 going down or whatever. For progressions, they have these progressions where the two outer notes, one goes up and the other goes down. So from the 6th, they consider that raising the 6th instead of going to a flat 7 because the direction is going up. It's just a terminology from the 1800s, really. The augmented 6th chord. The augmented 6th chords are an interesting animal. A lot of people have a hard time understanding them, but all they are, and I'll give you a brief little blurb on it. It's a dominant 7th chord from the sharp 5, is all it is. So if you're in a song and you got G as your tonic, D is your dominant chord, an augmented 7th chord would be an E flat 7 or a D sharp 7th chord. And that's covered a lot later, but I just wanted to throw that in. So the terminology of a diminished 7th comes from the classical consciousness, from the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, but pretty much until, still, they still call it a diminished 7th all over the country, And, it's the same thing. The flat 7, you can lower it down to a double flat 7, but the double flat 7 is always going to be the same note as a 6, isn't it? So a lot of the jazz people just blow it out of the water and call it a 6. To the great of being greatly offended. Classical people are greatly offended by calling it a 6, to the point where they won't speak to you anymore if you call it a 6. And the longer you stay in the world of college and take more harmony classes, you'll come across professors who are entrenched in the academic terminology so much that they don't see the practical sense of doing that, sense of calling it a 6. If you have a 6, most musicians, like if you go into a recording studio or if you go into a rehearsal, most musicians, now see if you guys agree with me, most musicians are going to be people who are self-taught, playing by ear, can't read music. You guys agree with that?
That sounds about right.
So then of that group, self-taught, playing by ear, some knowledge of theory, just basic major and minor chords. They know how to play major, they know how to play minor, they know how to play a 7th chord, they know how to play a 9th chord, right? So you're not talking about encyclopedic knowledge of theory. You're talking about people who can get by with, what they know. So calling a note a 6th instead of a double flat 7 it actually simplifies the concept rather than making people get confused, because some people don't understand a double flat unless they've had a class like this, right? A theory class where you understand what a double flat is. But most people in a rehearsal, they would kind of like pause, at least pause, trying to figure out what you mean. So jazz guys just bypass all the confusion. Just we'll call it a 6, But a lot of jazz guys call it a double flat 7. It's the same thing. A double flat 7 is a 6. So when you're modifying these notes, 1, 3, 5, 7, for the 7 you can leave it alone, or you can flat it, or you could double flat it, which is the 6, right? And then you could flat the 6, and if you flat the 6, you get a flat 6, right? So 6 to flat 6. What if you kept going? What's below a flat 6? A double flat 6? That's technically correct, but that is the same note as a 5, isn't it? So that's not a thing. People don't usually refer to anything as a double flat 6 because the interval of a 5th is the strongest sounding interval too. So nobody's going to mess with it. Okay. Did that answer your question there, Jay?
Yeah, it did.
So we have a 7, a flat 7, a double flat 7, and then a flat 6. Or a 7, a flat 7, a 6, and a flat 6. Those are the 4 things we can do to the 4th note of the chord, right? All right. The dominant 7 is found almost as frequently as the dominant triad. Okay. So it's a minor 7 on top of a major triad. So here we have a piece of music. Die Blume der Blumen. The 1 chord, the 5, 7, the dominant chord, the 1 chord, 5, 1, 5. Pretty simple. Okay. The inversions of the 5, 7. All right. Now we're getting some some spices to put on our steak, right? We've got these inversions. So if we have a stack like this, so we got 1, 3, 5, 7, right? And this could be anywhere. These are just graphic representations of the notes, yeah? So if we have a figured bass, that's going to be a 3, right? That's going to be a 5. And that's going to be a 7, right? So the stack is going to be 7, 5, 3 if you write out a figured bass. But that is the longhand nomenclature. People just usually write the 7. So they just write this one. Because these are assumed in a triad, right? Those are always assumed. Like if somebody writes a 1 chord, they just write a 1. They don't write a 1, 5, 3. Although that's correct, it's been tossed out for 400 years. So that's why. Okay, so we've got we take the 7 and we got a 5/7 chord, right? That's root position, right? First inversion would be the third in the bass, right? So a third in the bass. So if you have a G, B, D, F chord, root position would be G, B, D, F, like that, right? First inversion would be the B in the bass. So that's root position. And this is first inversion. So the B in the bass, now we're counting the intervals from the bass note. So now we're counting up from B. So a third above B is going to be D, right? That's a 3. And above B we've got an F. So there's your 5. And now the last one, the B to a G here. B to a G. B, C, D, E, F, G, right? That's a 6, right? Right, guys? B to G is a 6. So that's where we get our 6. So you could call this, if it were a triad, a 6 would be a first inversion triad. But here we have 4 notes. So you've got to add that F in there. So here we have a 6 right here, G to B, and then a 5 right there. Because that F, I'm going to use red to make it important here. That F, that's the important note to cause it to sound like a 7th chord, is the 7th note, right? The 7th, right? So there's 1, 3, 5, 7, right? That's a flat 7. But the F is the difference between a G triad and a G7 chord. is that note F is added to the 7th chord, yeah? So in the figured bass, we have to assume that that F must be mentioned in order to make it a dominant 7th chord, because the F is part of the dominant chord. So we have a 6, 5, 3 is the entire stack, but here we identify the 6 because that's the interval to the G, and then here's that F right there. That's a fifth above the B. It's F. It's actually a flat 5. But anyway, the F has to be in there. So we call the root first inversion a 6-5 and a 7th chord. And in a triad, we call it just a 6. Okay, so let me do this. So if we've got a 7th chord like this, there's a G, right? And here's a G7. Okay, so that's root position, right? So for first inversion, the 3rd is in the bass, so that's a G/B, right? So it's going to be B, F, and then G, right? So now the magic note is the bass note. So that interval is a 6, right? In a G7th chord, the first inversion is going to be similar. Going to be G7 over B. So that's going to be B, D, F, G. So we have that interval, right? There's your 6, right? But we also need to know, or the performer needs to know to play that F in the chord, doesn't he? Or she. So in order to get that F in there, we have to mention that. That's a 5 above the bass, right? B to F. So it has to be a 6-5. And that's called a 5-7. This is a 5. And that's a 5-6. Would you guys please screenshot that for me? So this is the reason why we use 6-5 is because of that F. The note F has to be in the chord, right? And if you just put a 5-6, the performer would just play a triad, wouldn't they? But if you put the 5-6-5, that means they've got to add a note a fifth above that B. So it's going to be an F. Making sense, Josh? Okay. Everybody on the same page here? Everybody's good? Okay. So the 6-5 means first inversion dominant chord. You can write 5-6-5. Some people prefer the full 5-7-6-5. I mean, there's so many different ways of writing stuff, but The main idea is that people have tried to eliminate extra notation where they can. Okay, so if we have the first inversion, now we've got this 5, 6, 5. We're not going to put the 3 in there. Nobody ever does the 3, do they? All right. Okay, second inversion. Now, for a G7, see, this means the key right here, the C with the colon. That means key of C. So the 5 chord in the key of C is going to be G, right? So the spelling of the 5 chord, if it's a 7th chord, I'll put over here. It's always going to be G, B, D, F, right? That's always going to be the 5, right? 5, 7 chord, right? So here we have a D, F, G, B. So the 5th in the bass is D, right? So that's a D. Okay. Now we have F, G, B over that. So D in the bass, then we have F, G, B. So again, from the bass note, the intervals above the bass note are D to F is a 3, right? D to G. That's a 4, isn't it? D, E, F, G. And then D to B. D, E, F, G, A, B. That's a 6, isn't it? Do you see how that works? D to F is a 3. D to G is a 4. And D to B is a 6. Okay, so the terminology is a 6-4-3 chord. And then over the years, we just call that a 4-3. The 6th is not listed. It's assumed. It's assumed, okay. So now, the next one would be the third inversion. So second inversion is the 5th in the bass. Third inversion is the 7th in the bass, right? So now let's do this again. So what's the 7th of the chord? Anyone?
F, right?
F, right? So F in the bass, right? So F, G, B, D, right? So now F is in the bass, so we have this interval here. F to G, how far is that?
A second.
The second. Then we got F to B. F,
It's a
G, A,
flat
B.
4.
F, G, A, B, right? It's a 4, right? Okay, and then here again we have F to D, F, G, A, B, C, D, right? F, G, A, B, C, D. That's 6, right?
Yeah.
All right. So we have the notation 642, which is technically correct. Abandoned over the years for 542, and then even more so 5-2, because the 6-4 is assumed on that chord. So anybody who's performing off of written figured bass is supposed to know what a 4-3 is and a 2. So here we have 5-7, 5-6-5, 5-4-3, and 5-2. Okay, so that terminology has been used since the 1700s easily, and up until modern times. Now, what problem do you see with notating something as a 5-2 chord? Anybody? If somebody puts a 5-2 chord on a chart, somebody's going to say, oh, you mean like Nirvana, right? That sus2 chord, the famous sus2 chord out of Seattle. All those bands that came out of Seattle, you know. Can you guys name the bands from Seattle?
Nirvana, Pearl Jam, those kind of bands.
Yeah, that's 2. How many are there? You guys are college students, man. You should be up on your rock and roll as an extracurricular knowledge.
Are the Foo Fighters from Seattle?
Well, Foo Fighters were after that big wave in the 90s. That was like at the end of the 90s. Dave Grohl was in Nirvana. You know that, right? Boy, he really catapulted his career, didn't he? Wow. Nirvana was on the top, right? Nirvana was on top, filling stadiums, right? They were the biggest band of the 90s. And then Kurt Cobain died, so there was a void. And then Dave Grohl still knew everybody they were working with. As in Nirvana, he still knew all the producers, he knew the engineers, he knew the record company executives from being in Nirvana. So then when he had his idea to put together a project, he just called him up and told him he has a demo, and they were looking for somebody to fill Nirvana's place, so they got behind him instantly because they knew who he was, and he had an incredible track record with Nirvana, and he already had his in to the industry because he knew every executive from being in Nirvana. He knew him on a first name basis, so he took advantage of that. And then look at the Foo Fighters now. Aren't they one of the biggest bands in the world? Like, don't they pack, arenas and stuff? Foo Fighters. Now, when I was teaching guitar lessons in the early 2000s, these students would bring me music. They want to learn songs by the Foo Fighters, right? And for the longest time, I thought they were called the Food Fighters. Guys that fight with food. All right. So macro analysis, superscript 7. So here's an analysis. G is the 1 chord, D7, 5-4-3. That's a 5th in the bass. And 5-6-5 is a 3rd in the bass, right? All right, so what they're looking at here, they're looking at, here's the notes here. What do we got here? We got A, C, D, A, no, that's a C. You got an F, you got an A, F. So we just did the pitch inventory there. So A, C, D, F, A. So we've got a D, F, A, C from our pitch inventory, and the lowest note in that bar being that A, right? And that's the fifth, right? So that's considered to be fifth on the bass for that measure. So you have to do a pitch inventory on a melodic line like that and see all the notes in the melody. Do they fit the chord? Yeah, they do, right? What about the next one here? What do we got there? We got a F, A, D, A, D, A, C. So it's the same pitch inventory, right? D, F, A, C. What's the lowest note, though?
The F.
Yeah, the F right there, right? So on a D7, the F will be the 3, right? So in classical terminology, the third in the bass is a 5-6-5, or we could call this a D7 / F on a modern chart. And also on those modern notations, if you're a pianist, keyboard player, whatever, it's easier for you to think of a D7 in the right hand with an F in the bass in the left hand, right? If you're a guitar player, you're going to ignore that bass note because your bass player is supposed to play it, and you're just going to play the D7, and then let the bass note in that chord be covered by the bassist. The only thing is, you got to make sure that when you're playing your D7, that your low note D in the chord that you play isn't lower than the low note F that the bass player is playing. And how do we solve that problem, guys?
Invert it.
No, we solve the clashing problem with the low note in the chord with the bass player by having rehearsals. What do rehearsals do? That's where you weed out the clashes and the glitches and the notes that collide with each other in the chords that you're choosing, right? So that's why rehearsals are pretty important. Now, I've played thousands of gigs over the past 40 years that the musicians, especially jazz musicians, do not want to rehearse ever. They just want to go to the gig, play the tunes in the book or on the list, get the money and go home. Well, there's an inherent problem with no rehearsing, and that is note clashes because you've never gone over anything. So sometimes right before the gig, you can, if you have the sheet music, you can sit down and talk through what you want to do over certain chords to make sure there's no clash, and a good musician will understand. But jazz musicians don't like to rehearse. They hate rehearsing. And if you want to rehearse with jazz musicians, they'll do it if you do one thing. What would that be? We're talking real world here. For guys that don't want to rehearse, how can you get them to rehearse?
Money.
Huh?
Money.
Good. You have to pay them. You have to pay people to rehearse. Now, you can imagine, like if you're doing a showcase concert of all original tunes, well, those need to be rehearsed, right? So you have to pay people to rehearse. Unless you have some really great, empathetic volunteers who want to rehearse for free. That's hard to find. The better the musician, the less they want to rehearse for free. The worse the musician, they'll rehearse for free, they'll play for free, everything. They'll do everything just to get a chance to play. And if you play in front of people, that's even better. So the worst musicians will rehearse for free. The best musicians won't rehearse for free. So if you're doing a showcase concert of your own original music and you've got some complexity going on there, you got some interesting things going on, you're going to have to rehearse it, aren't you? So here's the rub. That's why it gets to be expensive to play an original concert as a showcase, because you got to pay for all the rehearsals, and who knows if your concert may or may not be for money. I mean, if you're playing a showcase, if you're doing a senior project or whatever, well, you don't get paid for that, but the people rehearsing, if the better the musicians, the more they're going to want to get paid for rehearsing. Unless you have some really gung-ho people, which count your blessings when you get those people that'll rehearse for free. That's a tough one. But the rub is, when they rehearse for free for you, guess what? In 2 months, they're going to have a showcase. Guess who they're going to call? Haha, you have to rehearse for free now. Get it? Tit for tat, right? So whoever you get to rehearse for free, just expect to do them the favor sometime in the future, because that's the way it works. But if you have some really complicated music, I mean, take a look at the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra. Those guys have to rehearse a lot, don't they? Because that's complicated orchestral music. But they get paid an annual salary, don't they? So the rehearsals are part of their salary. They're not freelancers anymore. They're employees of the LA Philharmonic. They get paid their paycheck, however long, how many intervals that is, every 2 weeks or whatever. They're going to get paid to rehearse because they get part of their annual salary. However, jazz guys who make their living playing gigs in clubs, those guys get paid every night. You get money for playing. You don't get a retainer for the whole month or anything. So they're going to want to rehearse for money if it's complicated tunes. That's why those guys are notorious for not rehearsing. They just grab the sheet music out of a real book, and then they know how to play the tunes. And then if there's something unusual you got to do, you got to talk it through at the beginning of the gig, right before the gig. You just outline some things on the chart that you think you're going to do differently. But most really good musicians won't rehearse for free. Okay, I think I made that point clear. The better the musicians, the more it's going to cost you. And you're lucky if you find people that are really good who will do it for free. Count your blessings in that. Okay, in the music of the Renaissance period, the dominant seventh chord was foreign to the style. Yeah, they were not willing to even accept it as part of the music. The seventh chord developed when non-harmonic tones gradually assumed the importance of a chord tone. In the 16th century, the sound, but not the function of seventh chords came. They started using the seventh in the 16th century. Well, that would be the 1500s. I want to argue and say no, the first triads were used in the 1600s, so that would be the 17th century. Okay, early Baroque composers, Monteverdi, Scheidt introduced the 5/7 chord. Well, Bach used the 5/7 chord. In early 17th century music, examples from dominant seventh chords are scarce, and the chords are treated very conservatively. Yeah, that's true. Okay, here's an example of a suspended chord. So we have an A, C sharp, E, A, right? And there's a G there, right? So that's the seventh. Okay. All right, so now here's their terminology they use for dominant seventh chords. This uppercase M, lowercase m. That's the one we would like to know what it is, but I don't think it's a good idea in a real world situation. That means major third, and that means minor 7. So major third, minor 7. So we got 1, 3, 5, 7. We got a major third here. And here we have a minor 7. That's what that means. Major third, minor 7. So isn't it easier? What chord is this? This is B, G, C, D, F, B, D, G, B, D, F, right? G, B, D, F. That's a G7, right? Excuse me, G, D natural, F, and then we have a B natural here, right? So that carries over to there. So that's a GBDF. That'd just be a 7. So this terminology is used mostly in textbooks. Okay. Now here's the reason why people use the terminology that they do. Everything's always based on 4-part harmony: soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. That's the SATB terminology. So soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. So what does that relate to? What's your immediate go-to for that kind of terminology? What are they?
Vocal music.
Vocals, yes. Because vocals music was how it started, right? With the chanting and all the vocal music. So the 4-part vocal music was the first music that was written down, wasn't it? So this is what everything's based on, the proper voice leading of the different singers. So that's why we have all these rules, is to follow the singers resolving the notes in the proper way. Okay, so for this class, we are going to go to chapter 11. You guys read chapter 11. It's not that much. Doesn't go that far. All right. We're going to hold off on this until Friday. So this homework will be due on Monday. I just want you to read the chapter. And of course, some of you guys do the homework and turn it in early. I appreciate that. All right. All right, you guys. So read chapter 11 for Friday's class, okay? Thanks for coming today. We will see you on Friday.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.